Hello, everybody. Thank you for joining today's OpenSensors webinar. Today, we're going to be looking at how you can improve office space utilization. We're going to be looking particularly at kind of key metrics, reports, and tools. So it's going to be quite a heavy one on dashboard and analytics today. My name is David Thomas, and I'll be hosting today. My role at OpenSensors is to work alongside prospects and clients, examining their spaces, looking at their needs, and kind of working out what deployment best suits them. So these kind of analytics are what the end results of what we kind of do here. Before we get started, I'm just going to quickly run through what it is we'll cover. So firstly, as I said, we'll be looking at the key metrics. So lots of the ways that you can manipulate and analyze data to kind of see what's going on within your workplace and kind of the changes that you can make based on these analytics. Next, we're going to look at what we mean by mobility profiles, how you make them, and the impact that these can have on utilization. And then to finish up with, we're going to have a quick look at booking tools and what they can do to help boost utilization across your offices. So I think sometimes quite a good way to start these discussions, especially when they're quite data heavy, is to have a look at how these systems actually work and how the data is gathered. So when we go into an office space, we take a look at the kind of assets you've got, so phone booths, meeting rooms, all the kind of specialty spaces that people have and want to monitor. And we put a variety of sensors around. So you either have desk PIR sensors, which pick up body heat and motion, or you can have meeting room sensors, which can either say how many people are in the room by counting, or just whether or not that room was in use. There are also environmental sensors and noise sensors and that kind of thing, but they all connect to through the same way. They use LoRa, so long-range radio, to connect to our own gateways within an office, which then transport the data into the cloud via a SIM card. So it's a very end-to-end secure network, and the data is kept within it at all times, just a kind of Internet of Things system. But these sensors are what provide the data, and they run in real time, 24/7, just constantly gathering data, which is then analyzed by our software. So that's kind of like, I guess, the standard how things work. And first up, what we're going to look at now is how you then start to analyze this data. And as I said, it's being gathered in real time, 24 hours a day. So the first thing you need to do is kind of decide what period you're looking at. And you can do this, you can select any period. So we have simple last week, last month, and essentially the last quarter. And you can select which days of the week you want to look at and what time. So if you know that you have set working hours or office hours, you can then start to incorporate your own kind of office behavior into that. And what you can do, or what you can see by being able to select days and stuff, is the impact of trends on utilization. And this is what we're going to look at here. So what we have is in front of you now is an example, some clients' data, and we're looking at Monday to Friday just on a desks overview. And immediately you can see that there are 140 unused desks. Average utilization is 25%, peak is 48, and this means that at the peak time, 152 desks were occupied. But then when you start to look at how these desks were used throughout the week, Monday, very empty, Friday, very empty. Average utilization was 15% and 7% on those days compared to 30, 35 in the midweek days. So what happens to these underused desk seats and the average utilization metrics when you exclude Monday and Friday? Well, they clearly go down and the average utilization goes up. So what this means is that despite peak utilization staying the same, there is actually more space to play with than you thought. It's just a case of looking at what day this is taking place on. And that's what you can get from being able to add and minus days, is kind of identify what the actual impact that these behaviors your employees are exhibiting have on utilization averages. And the same thing can be found when you look at meeting rooms. So if you have Monday to Friday for the same client, it says that 35 of those rooms are underused, but on a Tuesday to Thursday, only 26 were. And this is quite a big difference. So 9 of those rooms, which were, if you looked for the whole week, said they're being underused. That's not true. They're only being underused part of the time. So there's things that you can start to do to improve that utilization throughout the week. And this is kind of a high level way of identifying that there is potentially an issue going on there and something that needs addressing. And the way that you can kind of confirm this is by looking at utilization over time, which is what you can see here. So we have seats and rooms again, and you can see as we go through the peaks in the week on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and then dropping off on Monday and Friday. And over time, this is a very repeating pattern. So it's something that this client is currently looking to address, and we're working with them to fix that. So that's one of the ways that you need to think about space, is actually like how are people interacting in space over time, and identifying the problem, identifying those trends is the first way to do so. And what we're going to do now in the rest of the session is look at how we can fix that using utilization data. And before we get into that, we need to talk very briefly about tagging, which is how all this kind of analysis and comparison is done. So these sensors which are placed on assets throughout meeting rooms and that kind of thing can all be kind of described or tagged in the system in any number of ways, however you can think to kind of differentiate them from one another. So some clients have area, asset type, direction, department, and then rooms is the same way. A really useful one is to look at them by capacity, whether or not they're bookable, by type, whether they've got audio visual equipment or not. It's kind of the thought that you put into it at the beginning of the process enables you to then make more comparisons and really view what's being used most, what isn't, and where the areas for optimization are, or what the problem areas are. So that's what we mean when we say tagging, and that's kind of what underlies the ability to do the next processes that we're going to discuss. So what we're looking at here is departmental tags. So we have a company here who have, well, this is some of their departments, and it shows their peak utilization and average utilization. And as you can see here, we're looking Monday to Friday over the last month, 9 a.m. to 6 p.m. And some of the departments have very high averages, some of them have very low averages. And what is really useful to see is the changes month to month. So if we had this set for the last week, this number here would represent how this has changed since the week before. So what we're seeing is here, in the last month, average peak utilization was 73%, which is 1% higher than the month before. Looking at utilization in this way enables you to see what trends are happening within your departments, which ones are using more space and which ones are using less space, and which ones are pretty much staying the same. The ones that are staying the same, you can pretty much assume they've been allocated the right amount of space, and the ones that are going up maybe need more. The ones that are going down are the ones where you can potentially start to take space away from them. I kind of like to think of this as playing Tetris with office space. A lot of people at the moment are trying to work out how to best fit expanding teams or shifting teams with varying working patterns into the same space without expanding. And it's by leveraging this kind of data that you can do so, by making sure that every team has the right amount of space provided to them and there aren't a huge amount of underused seats going around at any one time. Similarly, what you can start to do when you have this information is create work rotations. And this is how you address those empty Monday and Fridays. So we've taken one example department here, accounting, and at the top you have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday going down. And you can see those peaks in the middle of the week and how many underused desks there are at the tail end and beginning of the week. And if you build these profiles out across all of your departments, you can then start to see potentially what their true demand on space is throughout the week, and then where the empty spaces are in the week. You can start to say, right, if we have a rotation for this department and this week, next week it's another department, next week it's another department, and you can start to fill the gaps without actually having to expand or acquire more space. So the steps that we have so far are making sure that there is the right amount of space and that people are coming in at the most appropriate times to kind of fill that space itself. And what you can also do with a different type of tag, and this is kind of another element that's less people driven but more asset driven, is make sure that you are providing the teams and employees with the spaces that they require. So the same way that you can tag sensors by departments, you can tag them by asset type. So as we can see here, bench, desk, business class seats, collaboration booths, anything that you have. If you have phone booths, little collaboration zones, that kind of thing, you can tag them, compare them, and see which ones are more popular. So shared tables, very much popular in the last month. Meanwhile, business class seats not being very well used. And what's useful to see as well is how many of them there are. So desks, there's a lot of desks here, and most of them are underused. So maybe what they need to think about is what's the trend over a longer period of time and how does that compare to other assets in the workplace? And this is where tagging comes in really handy in the dashboard itself, because you can then search for multiple types of spaces and compare their usage against each other. So here we're comparing desk, team tables, and collaboration booths over the last month. And you can see that desks stay pretty much solid over the period, with dips on Monday and Friday. But meanwhile, collaboration booths, they're used sporadically, but there are times when they are all in use. So you might want to look a bit closer at how they're being used, and then potentially think about creating mobility profiles for these assets, which dictate kind of how they can be used and when. And that's what we're going to move on to here. When we talk about mobility profiles, it's kind of, let's take desks, for example, which is the most common use case. You can go from fixed to unused, depending on how much of the day that these are used. So fixed desks would be ones where pretty much all day, every day, someone is sat down using that desk. And at that point, it can probably be assigned to a specific employee or department who is very desk bound. And then we go down to semi-mobile, mobile, and unused. The unused are the ones which you realistically can just, without any impact to anything else, repurpose the space to something else. And then we have mobile, and they're kind of the ones where you might want to make them a touchdown space, make them a collaboration zone, something more free, which can be used more flexibly by people. And it's by gathering this data throughout the day and seeing how each of them is being used individually that you can start to make these mobility profiles. And as you can see here, you can do this for every type of asset that you have. So alternate work settings, atriums, for examples here, you can start to say, not only are these the types of spaces that are most popular, but this is how those spaces are being used throughout the day and how they should be kind of made available to employees to use to make sure that they're being used most effectively. The next way that is, well, it's currently very topical when we talk about utilization is meeting rooms. And the thing that we are having a lot of people come to us with at the moment as an issue is meetings are being booked based on, well, meeting rooms are being booked based on how many people are invited to the meeting. But there's always, well, not always, but typically a lot of people will be working remotely. So if you have a meeting booked for 8 people, maybe 4, 6 of them will be working remotely, and it ends up with only 2 people in the room. And this is clearly a pretty, well, wasteful use of space. So meeting usage is very, very topical at the moment, and especially when you look at them by capacity. So what we've got here is a client's rooms, and they have 1-person rooms, 12-person rooms, 2-people rooms, and 6-people rooms. And we can see that the 12-people rooms and the 6-people rooms are by far the most popular. And here's the usage for the 6-person room throughout the day. So you can see that it is very much in use all the time. There's very few times in the day when it isn't actually being used, but that doesn't necessarily mean that it's being used well, which is why counter sensors are so important. So here's another example of a 6-person room. As you can see, there is never a period of time that it isn't in use, but when you look at how many people are in that room at any one time, now on average, it's only occupied by 3 people. So while the demand for a space is there, the current space that exists isn't appropriate, and you could and probably should repurpose those spaces to be more appropriate. And that's where our recommendation calculator comes in. So when you know the full array of the rooms you have, their capacities, and then you know how they're being used throughout the week, we can suggest to you saying, you currently only have 6 1-people rooms, but based on how the rest of your rooms are being used, you could do with having more, you could do with having 9 of them, and you could do with having fewer of these 2-people rooms because they're never actually being used by 2 people, they're only being used by 1. And as you kind of get bigger and bigger arrays of meeting rooms or conference rooms, you tend to be able to free up increasingly large amounts of space by doing so. Just to finish up then, we are coming up to the end of our 15 minutes, but one of the best ways to actually encourage utilization, encourage people to use the space that there are, is to introduce a booking tool which enables people to find and quickly access all of these spaces that you're providing for them. It's all very good and well introducing quite a lot of new pleasant to use environments or different to use environments which encourage people to work and collaborate together. But if people don't know that they're there or find them hard to access, then they're going to be underutilized or less utilized than perhaps you'd like. But by putting them onto a centralized booking system where it remembers your preferences and recommends them for you, and you can then just search them by these tags, it really helps people know what is available to them, find them well in advance, and make sure that people come into the office knowing that the space that they require is there. So those are some of the key ways that I would say you can start to improve your office utilization. Just making sure that teams have the spaces they need. You understand how people are working in the week so that you can start to plan rotations. You plan asset usage better when you can understand which ones are popular and which ones aren't. And then you can introduce a booking tool to make sure that the changes you've made are open and ready for people to kind of actually utilize. So that's the end of our session today. If you have any further questions, please do get in touch. My email is david.a@opensensors.com, or you can just head to our website to find out more information and see previous webinars where we've spoken about similar topics, but more on a high theoretical level. So I hope today's been interesting, and I hope you'll have good afternoons. Thank you very much.